is no other option, that Africa just must integrate. Because of the nature of the continent with 54 different countries, it is impossible to generate the kind of market in each country that is required to lift people out of poverty and keep people out of poverty. And so the consolidation of markets on the continent is the only option. So integration is an imperative, and the pursuit of African governments to regionalize is really creating opportunities to look at how to consolidate past gains, but also how to take advantage of the global market, and now that Africa is evolving as a global player.
This conversation has been happening for some time. So what are some of the opportunities, or what can be done in order to fast track this integration?
Well, the fact that Africa is one of the youngest continents, actually it is the youngest continent in the world, so it's got a massive workforce that is young, vibrant, and educated, and increasingly skilled and connected. This is a huge resource that is even higher than Africa's natural resources, and this is the time to unleash it. And the best way to do it, of course, is to facilitate free movement, facilitate integration, financial and otherwise. And the opportunity, so that is an opportunity, that the resources there in terms of the human capital to move things along. The other one is the fact that the African Union has now adopted the free trade area, the continental free trade area, which is unprecedented in terms of its ability to really enable Africa's markets and get it up to the level that could transform structurally the economies. I think we are seeing estimates as huge as increasing Africa's export by over 30%, but also possibilities of decreasing trade deficit by over 50%. So the impact that this would have on Africa's over 1 billion people is quite mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well, we see that the impact for actually ratifying and going ahead with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is massive for the continent. But we have 22 African countries yet to ratify. You know, what is holding them back?
Well, the fact that you've already got 12 ratifications in less than a year is something to celebrate. But in terms of what's holding them back, I think it's important. Some of the countries have come back to say they have to consult with their population, which we really admire and encourage, because this agreement should not just be between states. It has to be about the people as well. It has to be people-centered. We have to take into account the needs of the people and how they will benefit from these agreements and arrangements. But also, when you have a free trade agreement, there will be winners and losers. And it's important that the continent figures out how to compensate the losers and how to redistribute the gains that will come from the integration. So it takes time, but I think with 12 out of the 22 required already signed up, I think that's optimistic, and we're hopeful that the rest will come on board.
Yeah. Earlier on, you talked about Africa having a young population. You know, we have young people who are ambitious, who have dreams, and who have different innovations. So is there financing models here on the continent ready to support?
Yeah, thank God for that. You know, I think that's one thing that's hopeful about the continent, that you have young people with dreams and who have the potential to innovate. And I think this free trade agreement should largely be about them and the ability to harness, you know, what they have to offer, the talent that is there on the continent. And I think in terms of financing models, because yeah, integration requires resources, Africa needs to really expand the base for resource mobilization. First, the domestic resource mobilization, looking at tax bases, looking at expanding taxpayers' domain, but also looking at innovative financing, but blending of finances, both public and private sector, private financing. It's important to look at public-private partnerships. States alone cannot, the public sector alone cannot handle this. We need to unleash what the private sector has to offer. But also areas like sovereign wealth funds. Africa's sovereign wealth funds, I think, estimated at about $160 billion right now. I think that Africa could tap into that for this initiative. But we can also look at pension funds. And we know that these are lying idle in many countries in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, the big economies, for instance. Africa could tap into that. We also know that there's a lot of foreign currency reserves of African countries that sit in other countries, and it would be good for these to work for financing in Africa. So there are opportunities out there to mine new areas of financing that have, until now, actually not been touched.
So we have policies set by the governments, but then we have reality on the ground. So how can the gaps between be bridged?
Well, this is a challenge, obviously, for integration, because you've got 55 diverse countries who have to harmonize policies across the board. So this will be slow and painful, but I don't think it's impossible to achieve. But also you have issues around bilateral and multilateral agreements that are existing already with countries, and these have to be looked at to align with the Continental Agreement. This will also take time, but it must be done. Those agreements that currently undermine Africa's integration, regional integration, have to be tackled. The Economic Partnership Agreement, for instance, these have to now be reviewed to make sure that the agreements that African countries have with their partners in the world can reinforce, not undermine, the continental integration.